on the internet.
We're live. Hey there.
Howdy, howdy.
I was going to try one of those. Oh, hey, you're there, but whatever.
Good to see you. Good to see you've upgraded your background.
I have. This is not a virtual background. That is in fact a plant over my shoulder here, which means I'm not at home because I would probably have killed it.
I understand that. I spent a long time running into that issue. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Nope. Okay, good. I switched my audio. All right. Anyway, I went through a long time. I have a mother who has won many awards for photographing her ridiculous plants. I basil in the span of 3 minutes, which is essentially a weed. So I appreciate that. I'm working on it.
I'm pretty sure I've killed in my office at home, my home office, a succulent. Basically a cactus. I'm pretty sure I killed it. The plant that you have to do nothing to is sitting on my desk.
I feel strongly that I got you plastic plants that you managed to kill. So it's just a game at this point.
It is a game. Yeah.
So I had a great week. How was your week, man? We haven't really talked.
No, we haven't. It's been a good week. I am in the wilds of upstate New York, so if my internet goes a little wonky, I apologize. In my hometown, just hanging out. I'm at my parents with my kids. My wife took her kids down to her parents, so we kind of took a few days with our families with the virus and all that. It's been sort of touch and go, sort of touchy with everybody. So trying to be careful. So we're hanging out up here. My kids we're swimming a lot. And I know it doesn't look like it, but I got some color. There's a little bit, before the receding hairline, there's a little bit of color right in here.
No, I can see, because there's color, then there's no color, then there's gray. So
then there's gray. Yeah. In between is where the stripe is.
I dig it.
How about your week? How are you doing?
Good. I am really excited. We're finalizing all the details for the lounge stage, which we're going to be announcing later on this week. Which I am super excited and super nervous about, because we've never tried running like a 5-hour concert online before. But
we did 3 artists for a couple hours and survived. Yeah. Everybody, I think, survived it. So.
Yeah, I think right now we're looking at somewhere between 12 and 15 artists. But as I said, we'll be setting that up for everyone to check out on Wednesday morning, I believe. So be watching the Tribal Mischief page and community and all of our stuff, and we'll have it up there. So I'm jazzed about that. I'm jazzed about merch.
Yes.
You got
one.
Yeah, I did.
That's awesome.
After I figured last week, after I had the beautiful demonstration of both our merchandise and my alcoholism, that I should show that I actually, use it too.
It should just be called COVIDism, and there should be no judgment. And
fair enough.
Hang on before I finish that thought. It should just be called COVIDism, and there should be no judgment. Was having that conversation earlier. I've now done some, Google research, so I'm clearly an expert. That's how that works, right?
If Google says it, then it's true.
It has to be true. 1 to 2 drinks a night is totally healthy. So drink up, internet land. I think that means we're all good. L'chaim is soya.
Indeed.
We haven't told the Isoya story. I don't know if tonight's the night for it, but
I think longer story for a different night. I think John's got more. John has enough stories.
Yes.
That my odd sailing story about an Isle of Lesbians can be held off for a different evening.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But it's ISOIA, which stands for In Spite of It All.
In Spite of It All. Yep.
If there is not a toast, I don't know of a toast better suited to right now than Isoya.
Agreed. It's one of those things that works both in good times and bad, but in particular in moments like this where things just are a little crazy, it feels particularly appropriate. So it's nice to say that.
It does.
So we got a couple just pieces of business to get through before we get John on. I mentioned John a couple times. I haven't actually said his full name. John Laurenti,
Yes.
legendary DJ. One of the first actual DJs that we met as artists, because we had this weird experience that I know we're not singular in that we released our first album, and like within a week we were like, oh yeah, you guys are playing in Australia.
Australia, that's right. We don't
Oh.
know anyone.
And we watched our music go from Australia to Japan, over to Alaska, down the West Coast, through Texas, and finally made its way back to Boston, Massachusetts. And the first radio station that played us back then was UMass Radio. And that was John and Jay and all those folks that were super friendly. I remember one of my first moments hearing us play on local radio. I was picking up my then wife at the train station, and she got in the car right as Who Will Love You started playing, and she's like, "You're listening to your own record." I was like, no, it's the radio. And she did not believe me, to the point where we got home and I locked the door and I'm like, you're waiting till the radio comes on to prove this. WUMB really supported the heck out of us in those early years. It was wonderful. And John he's got so, what I'm really looking forward to talking to John about is we live in this folk bubble. It's a wonderful bubble, and we love this folk bubble. But there's, in my mind, the genesis of where art meets audience, which is, what our goal is, was really figuring out, for a community like ours, how to expand it. Because right now, it doesn't feel all that expanded. It feels... It feels insular. So talking to John, who's had just tremendous experience in popular music, in sort of indie music, in folk music, just someone that can speak to that wide breadth and what that means. I'm really excited about it. That'll be fun. I wanted to shout out a friend of the band, Gordon Nash, whose birthday it is.
Happy birthday, Gordon.
I was almost late because we were having a virtual Zoom birthday. We had like 30 people on and was slowly introducing them one by one and wanted them to tell their story. And I was just sitting there looking at the clock. I'm like, I got 45 minutes. I was like, hi, I'm Ethan. It's really good to be here. I got to go. Bye. Happy birthday. But I'm also jazzed that watching, we have, I believe for the first time, Stephanie Hughes Atkinson, who is one of the graduates from our very first songwriting retreat that we ran 3 years ago in Maine. And since then, she has, from someone who had never written a song, she has now put out at least 2 records that I believe, and is really just doing awesome. And it's really good to see you, Stephanie.
And that's one of the things that we've done with this as a band, and that we've done with a lot of the tribal Mischief efforts, is we have tried to help folks the same way we were helped get to a broader audience. We've really adopted that sort of pay it forward mentality, and with the lounge stage, as we will be announcing in a couple of days, and that's some of what we're going to be talking with John about tonight. We want to mention the cutoff, Ethan. Don't forget the Facebook cutoff.
Yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know, we run both on Facebook and on Twitch. Twitch is our native home. That's where we live. We do it over here to catch the folks on Facebook because we have so many friends that live in that space. But we move over to Twitch at usually somewhere between 25 past and 35 past. And the reason we do that is we occasionally ask you for money. If you feel like giving it to us, but most of the time that's because we want to pay artists that we're working with. Yep. So you'll see us pop this up occasionally during our shows. I'm taking it down because I don't want you to pay us for this. Twitch and YouTube are two systems out there where you can get paid passively just for people watching. And it's important to me that if we build something here, we're building something specifically to the purpose of getting to the point where there is some level of sustainability. Because what I care about is I want to see all artists get to a level of sustainability where putting out a record isn't a begging process with their fans to get money for an album. And, one of the conversations I'm looking forward to having with John is, what does an album mean now? Like, what is the definition to a DJ, to someone who is so ingrained in formats, historically speaking, what is the importance of an album versus single nowadays? Has it changed? What does that mean? So this is sort of a fun question that I'm looking forward to having. I also wanted to introduce.
I was just going to say, we've seen a lot of people that have been releasing stuff through the pandemic. They're like, I need to get content out there. And we've seen a lot of singles, and that seemed to be the way it was going, but have also seen a lot of people start to drop, maybe even some artists that are coming up on the lounge stage, put music out because they just need to. Like, they need to get the music out of them right now.
Yeah, it's nice that, and this has been a discussion that I feel like artists have been having for about 15 to 20 years now, which is, if you go back to the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, beginning of the 90s, if you put out an album, that meant something. Like, you had either a financial backing, or you had a label behind you. There was a definitive bar for entry. And in the mid-90s to early aughts, all of a sudden, home recording gear took major strides, became something that people could start affording, and all of a sudden, there was a just introduction where anyone that was really interested could produce a record.
Right.
And now we've hit a completely new, different phase where it's not really about records. It's about simply getting in front of and cultivating an audience. And that, I find that to be a fascinating change. And what does that mean? And can we be mad about it as artists? Of course we can be mad about it, but how can we find, where's the helpful way to look at that and try to find ways to make it work for you? So looking forward to that conversation. I'm also, I wanted to introduce, for the next 3 weeks, we have partnerships. We're working with a couple of different organizations that we love, that we really, really love, and we're super jazzed to help promote them. The first one for this week are our friends over at the Philadelphia Folk Festival, which is running August 13th to 16th. This is a virtual festival, and they are all in. They're presenting well over 100 artists.
Multiple stages, live, merchandise, food. I don't know how they're doing food. Have you figured that out yet?
I think there's just a button and Domino's are us, but
that's funny.
I'm super excited, particularly about this festival, because I know the director. Obviously, we had Justin Nordell on 2 or 3 weeks ago on the show, and they are putting so much effort into defining what an online musical experience can be. So I truly believe I've been to a lot of half-hearted holding an iPhone and playing in hopes that you're not pointing it at your forehead and you're getting the right thing. This is not that. This is something very, very different, and I'm super excited to see what that looks and feels like. So shout out to our friends over there. August 13th to 16th, they're selling virtual tickets. I bought one. Jake bought one. They might be our partners, but we still support them. So I'm super excited.
Before they were partners, we bought them before these were partners.
Yes. So I'm much like with Randy and our joint Superman shirts. I am flying my Philadelphia Folk Festival colors here. Nice. And I am going to take off this shirt because it's really hot. We're really excited about that. And by all means, please check it out. They have the best URL in all of folk music, which is folkfest.org. So we'll add that to the little doobly-doo that goes across the bottom. But please do check that out. We're super excited for them. Yeah.
I think with that, do we have any other business to get to?
I think that's the majority of the stuff that we need to sort of talk through, and I don't want to hold our guest off any longer because she's awesome and he's better at talking than I am because he's done it professionally for a very long time.
Yep.
So I'm really excited to bring in our friend of the org,
Friend of the podcast.
Yeah.
John Laurenti.
How are you?
Hey, John.
You know, out of all the things that you guys have said, there was a lot going on there. I want to know about the island full of lesbians.
It's
We all have our crazy stories, but that sounds like a good one.
It is. It's sort of the legend in my family.
It's a family thing. All right.
It is, which makes it even more interesting if you think about it. A very long time ago, I will tell the incredibly abridged version of it. My father and I. This was shortly after I got out of college. Right when you're as a young adult, you're.
This is already not the abridged story.
You're adjusting to that period where you can drink with your parent.
Yes.
And my father and I were sitting out at this house in Maine, just looking out at the ocean at 10 o'clock at night, looking at the stars, and neither one of us was close to sober. And my father just starts pointing out at the horizon. He says, I've been looking at that light for 10 years. We got to go there tomorrow. And I, not sober, figured he was not sober enough so that if I said sure, the next morning it wouldn't be an issue. As it turns out, it was, and it became a absolutely ridiculous adventure. And the people that know me know I have a bit of hero worship with my father, but this is one of those sort of perfect moments. My father had a long-standing sort of belief that if something made you uncomfortable, that was your problem.
Right.
This is more or less. This is the quintessential version of him taking that and running with it.
All right.
So.
Did you go on the island?
We did. We were invited on the island. Kind of. Yeah.
Your father kind of invited himself.
Yeah. We after sailing for about 4 hours on a sailboat. So like this was,
that's a lot of work.
It's a reasonable amount of work, and all we had to keep us sane was a canvas bag full of beer. So the long and short of it is, by the time we got to this light that my father had been looking at for 10 years, he just got to the front of this 24-foot day sailor. And my father was a big man like me. And he just got in the very front of the boat and started yelling at the island, I've been looking at your light for 10 years. And you just watched all of the people on the island go like,
what's the deal?
Yeah, it was at this point that I realized, looking around and seeing all the people on the island, that they were all walking in pairs, and they were all relatively middle-aged women. And I tried gently to explain to my father that perhaps this island isn't for us.
Yeah. All righty.
In any case.
That the toast on the island is soya, and that's how we bring it. That's how we got there.
Alrighty.
Yeah, they introduced us to that.
Lovely. So you guys are good. Everything's well.
We are.
Yeah.
How are you? How are you dealing with all this?
I'm busy, which is good. I'm doing a lot of it from home, like a lot of radio people are. There are some people that do still go into the studios, but currently I do traffic reports for Rhode Island. I have a Westwood One show, and that runs in the overnights, but I'm doing everything from my home, which is great. But I do have, I mean, I know so many friends that have been furloughed in the industry and taken pay cuts. And it's the same with, the music industry too. I was telling Jake earlier that I ran into a buddy of mine, and he's been furloughed, and he doesn't know when the shows are going to happen again. It's going to be difficult. And so this virtual folk festival, the Philly Folk Festival that you're talking about, how are they doing it? What are the ticket prices? And it's all obviously streaming, but where, if they have food, do you get the food virtually? Do you see the pig roasted?
There are interesting things, and one of the things that Jake and I have been doing during this is we've been trying to establish this show and try to figure out what this new world looks like for musicians. Because I'll be honest, I don't think the world's ever going to be what it was 6 months ago.
No,
it will get back to something, but what has come from this experience, in my mind, will fundamentally change, hopefully in good ways, the experience of imbibing music, live music, for a lot of people. And for artists, that means, unfortunately, yet another hat, yet another proficiency needs to be learned, meaning they have to figure out how to present themselves in this format as opposed to just doing the other thing. We discovered Twitch, oddly enough, because we were aware that it was monetizable. And that was sort of, at the end of the day, that was one of the things that we found fundamentally interesting and why we focused on it. And what we discovered is initially Twitch was built 15 years ago specifically for video game players to stream themselves playing video games for other people to watch.
That's $1 billion industry.
It was purchased by Amazon for, if I remember correctly, somewhere between 12 and $15 billion.
Wow.
About 7 or 8 years ago, maybe a little longer. So it is owned by Amazon to the point where, and this is for anyone watching on Twitch, if you have an Amazon Prime account, you can subscribe to a Twitch channel for free, and that person that you're subscribing to will get that $5 subscription. So there is not just the advertisement money in it, but there is actual sort of Patreon-esque direct ability to back people, and there are ways to do it for free. So like that just struck us as really particularly interesting. But while I was researching it, I was watching, one player, and he had, one video game player, and he had a button on his screen, and if you clicked it, you could order him a pizza, and it literally, you put in your credit card, whatever you're using, and his address and all of that stuff was hidden, but it was all automated through the back end. And 15 minutes later, doorbell rings, he gets up and gets a pizza and thanks someone for it.
Wow.
So there are, I think there have been strides made in this land. Unfortunately, they've been, or not unfortunately, but they've been done with a community that is very divergent from our own.
Sure.
But to me, that's, again, there's a lot of great opportunity that comes from that, where we can say, all right, they've already figured out some of this. Let's just adopt what we can adopt.
I was talking to Steve Morse earlier today, and we were talking about, he told me that Flat Top Johnny's, I guess, closed. And there's another bar that closed as well. But we were talking about the clubs once you try to get back into that normalcy. But, you look at Toad, you look at the Plow and Stars, you look at the Lizard Lounge. I mean, if it's a 5-piece band on Toad stage, the fifth guy is off the stage. So, right. I mean, how are those clubs survive? It's impossible.
Yeah.
And I don't wish, to have any of this happen to small clubs. Never mind the stadiums. I mean, you get football games that, Gillette's going to have 13,000 people there.
No.
You can't do that. You can't.
It has to be. I think it has to be a systemic approach where there are other countries that are doing that, where there's rent abate for these businesses that can't open. There's rent abatement, so the owners aren't on the hook. There's, the mortgage abatement or whatever it is. So whoever the owner's paying isn't charging them for that period of time. And it's putting a lot of this stuff on hold because that's the only way to not cripple this. And yes, there's more beyond that in higher finance. We'll bring friends on sometime to talk about it, but I don't know how we should do it.
We only get 4 months of really good weather. So all these outside cafes and everything else what are you going to do once the fall hits? Right. November, December. So, I went to Kowloon last night. They had a singer up on the stage and it was great. And then they showed videos and everything. But again, it's only going to be, the window is very, very small to get that done.
Yep. The Tupelo music halls. And there are so many venues, in Boston that need to survive. There are only so many venues that are far enough out that have space, like the Tupelo Music Hall, which we've mentioned a couple times, that have the room to do outside stuff. I was just chatting today with some friends from New York City. They've spent the last 3 months here in upstate New York. They went down about a month or so ago to grab some stuff, to look to the stacks of canned tuna fish that they still have in their apartment. And they're just watching stuff close. I don't know how stuff in any large city survives it.
But let's just say, I'm not going to say miraculously, but let's just say it subsided. You going to get on a tour bus with 10 people and tour for 6 weeks? No, I wouldn't.
No.
Well, that's the thing I find interesting because, to me, that's the next step of reopening that makes some sense to me. You decide who your family, who your community of people that you trust implicitly, and maybe those 10 people are the 10 people that you trust implicitly. But even then, 10 people on the road, all of you are going to run into, no matter how good every single one of you is, you are all going to run into this virus. Because that has been the unquestionable truth that we have found across our musical friends and associates, across just our general sort of watching the world work. Mm-hmm. As we've seen all of these more rural states say, oh, that's a big city thing. We don't need to worry about that. And then all of a sudden, what was the stat the other day was 50% of all children under 13 tested for COVID in Florida tested positive.
Wow, I didn't see that. Jeez.
Yeah.
I've talked to people about wearing masks and everything, and it comes down to 2, maybe even 3 simple things. You have an air filter in your car to protect your engine so it doesn't get damaged. You have an AC air filter in your home to protect your family from toxins and dust and everything. So why wouldn't you wear a mask?
Yep.
Right.
It's plain and simple.
Yeah, there is. I mean, there are so many sort of good meme stories that have gone out. Like the entire no one gets into a fight walking into a store when no shirt, no shoes, no service is on the door. Right. Why are we getting all up in arms about this? And,
I think my favorite the other day was from my cousin, who's a nurse, and it was a picture of, I think, a doctor in a mask, and it said, next time you have surgery, make sure you tell your doctor not to wear a mask in surgery, because clearly it does nothing to stop the spread of viruses, and apparently it cuts down on your oxygen, and you wouldn't want him to pass out, now would you?
Well, that was the thing. Jon Stewart had done an interview, and he said, the next time you go to the dentist or the doctor, just tell them not to wear the gloves and not wear a mask. You're an American. Get in there and start doing your job.
Damn it. Yeah.
There is, he's just started to do interviews again. It's been so long, sort of not with Jon Stewart, that I kind of OD'd on them to a certain extent. But he had this sort of great quote at one point where he was basically, the reason he was back in it, he was just trying to promote a new movie. Yeah. And he basically described it like, how has this experience been for you? He's like, it's kind of like going to the scene of a plane crash and trying to hand out a chocolate bar. There's not a lot of takers.
Oh, jeez.
But I think with all human experiences with this kind of thing, like you see the worst, but you also see the best in people. And I've been really pleased for the things that we've been able to discuss with some of our friends and some of the people in our community in the ways that they are trying to make this a better experience for folks in general. So, I am still hopeful. I just think it's going to require change. And I think us as Americans are really, really bad at that.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, we have no patience.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a study I just saw that it takes 5 minutes for someone to get pissed off when they're waiting in line at a store. So, I mean, imagine being at a football game and you're 6 feet apart trying to go to the bathroom and you're spending the whole game waiting in line to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. And it's the same with, when you look at a club like the Paradise where they have, 2 bathrooms? That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or other places that, every place has 2 bathrooms, but in regards to Toad and the Plow, when those places get packed, you got to work your way through the crowd, and it's going to be different and weird. And
can you imagine going to the bathroom at Passim? I mean, come on.
I just, there are some kids I work with at one of my a part-time job I have, and I said, you guys will never know the benefits of going to see a show. Ever. You'll never know what it's like to see a show, whether it's at the Orpheum or Gillette. You'll never experience I've made so many friends going to so many shows, people coming to Boston to see U2 or Aerosmith or whoever. I mean, we're a great musical city, and I'm proud of that. But I've met so many friends that have come here just to see the bands play here because it's so special to them.
Yeah.
And you don't have that now if you're 18 to 22. I've been fortunate to go to a lot of shows. You guys have been fortunate to play a lot of shows, go to a lot of shows. Yeah. It's going to be different, and it's up to them to make sure that change can, that somebody can figure out a way to do it, so we're not all wearing hazmat suits.
Yeah. And to me, that it really, in the short term, goes back to that. Who's going to be the trailblazer that figures out how to make this experience something that people find meaningful at home? And I think it can be done. Like, I know it can be done.
Well, we did that with the Lounge Stage preview tour. We were really surprised at this. Just a couple weeks ago, we did a preview tour for Falcon Ridge Folk Festival. And we took 3 great artists. It was Zoe Mulford and Scott Cook and The Promise is Hope. And we said, well, we have this little StreamYard platform that we've been using for our podcast, and why not? We'll just give it a shot and see what happens. And all of us, Ethan and myself included, we were all really, really surprised at. Obviously, it doesn't replicate the feeling of it, but the ability to throw comments up on the screen and chat with each other in the chat rooms and things like that gave some sense of engagement. And so it's been interesting to start to see those sort of things come together.
And you've got people like Adam Ezra, who was our very first guest, who very early on in this quarantine experience did an evening show and had about 500 people show up and basically said, well, listen, if you guys will be here tomorrow, I'll be here tomorrow. And he's now on show 115, 20, and just has not, whether he's grown his community or not, well, he has. But
people are starved for music.
Even if he hadn't grown his community, the relationship that he now has with his core audience, they will follow him till the end of the earth.
And the funny thing the funny thing about Adam is he'll wear a mask, but still won't wear shoes.
Yes. I can
relate. That must be how he got it. He was the first case in North America to get COVID through his feet.
Yes, gotta watch those feet. But I mean, when you look at who's played Tupelo, it's all local. It's all local musicians. I mean, you're not going to have when do we get the national touring bands back? Was it Dierks Bentley that did a big show recently? It was
I don't know.
One of the country stars did it, but it turns out that the band all drove themselves to the show.
Yeah,
it's not like they traveled on a tour bus. And again, when you get to the big guys, okay, fine, they get the money. But when it comes to local musicians, you're only going to play your region, maybe, or you might venture out and go a little further west if you want.
Yeah.
But, through this platform, it's much easier.
And even beyond that, if you are the artist that says, you know what, I'm going to take my chances, I'm going to get out there and see where I can go. Most artists are self-insured medically or are insured through public systems that are mostly state-based. So now you're outside of your state. What happens if you get sick then? Like there's a lot of realities to it that just sort of, I think it rightfully causes pause. I do want to quickly point out that Cultural Infidel, one of our only every show attendees from the very beginning, has let us know that's 128 shows that Adam has done. Has not missed. But yeah, I'm with you, John. I think I'm really interested to see what the next 6 to 7 months bring.
Yeah.
By way of people figuring that very thing out.
I mean, I think that, my wife and I watched Hamilton on Disney Plus. And again, I saved $3,000 because I didn't have to pay the tickets in New York.
A pair of tickets, right?
Yes. But I think that if it's done right and filmed properly, you could still stream Broadway shows live, and I'd pay $50 to $100 to see it as long as I know I'm getting a great performance. And I think that at some point, bands, maybe venues will do that as long as you've got great cameras and you can have some sort of interaction with the people, whether it's, again, through something like this or whatever. But I think that anybody that's a fan of any band, whether it's, a local musician or a major artist, those fans would rather see the inside of a rehearsal or just them goofing around in a studio. And I would pay for that.
Yeah.
That's who I am.
Yeah, but that's what we've learned from these platforms.
Right.
Is the people that have thousands and thousands of people watching them, they are not tuning in to see a polished, they're tuning in to watch some schlum try to beat a video game and usually do it poorly. Like it's the experience of feeling like you have a communication. We had Red Molly's jumped in and basically they started looking at Twitch. They're like, this is all electronic music and it doesn't seem to be music centric. So like, what do we think it'll open it up? I do. I think there are millions, literally millions of people at any given time sitting on Twitch looking for something new and different.
Yeah.
The trick, as I understand it, or as I believe, is authenticity. Yeah. And if they get to see that rehearsal, if they get to see the mistakes, if they get to see you be like, oh, this is really frustrating. Like those are what people are dying for.
I mean, that's why those platforms like Twitter, one of the reasons they exploded, especially in terms of art and celebrity and all that, was that you could actually interact with these people.
Right.
And so, look, I watched a video just a couple of weeks ago with Sadler Vaden, who is Jason Isbell's guitarist. And I've watched Sadler play. I saw him at the Ryman, and I saw him at Newport Folk Fest, and all these different places where he's there and I'm here. Well, now I'm in this place with literally, there were 70 other people in this virtual room. And I can send a message that he's going to read. And Sadler, if you're watching right now, we'd love to have you on the podcast. I sent him an email to his management. But it's that intimacy, which is really weird to get over.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, John, you've been talking to people with little to no feedback over, for a long time now. Like, what does this change for you, if anything? Like, how does this look to you right now in terms of broadcasting and all that?
Radio in general?
Yeah.
As of right now, from what I've seen, ratings are up for a lot of stations. People were listening at home, online. Okay. Now that some states have opened up, the ratings are picking up again. It's funny, though, the number one format throughout the last 3 months was classic rock. I mean, there are some cities where, you get, the Kiss 108s of the world and the pop stations and, Latino stations and things like that. But overall, like in the major markets, it was mostly rock or classic rock. Like I just saw the numbers for my old station in Providence, and they're killing it, even with women.
Wow.
And I've always said that radio is excellent for the coasts and major cities, because if there's, God forbid, a terrorist attack or a major accident or anything like that, major news story, we need to know now. No offense if you're in Nebraska, but we need to know what's going on. And it's that connection. It's always been that way. I mean, you look at the Boston market, it's, Matt Siegel's been on Kiss 108 for 40 years. Laquadero was on for 30. Carter Allen is still doing it, and I think he's over 40 years now in Boston radio. And it just goes to show you, we don't like change around here as much as other cities.
No,
I mean, it's getting to that point, like downtown is, but elsewhere, I mean, in my lifetime, there's only been 4 mayors of the city of Boston. So I mean,
oh my God.
Yeah, so I mean, radio is still strong. I just feel that the audience is always smarter than the consultants think they are. There's no reason you should be playing the same 600, 700 songs. There's better songs from those bands and other bands that are better as well.
Yep.
And, you can take those chances. I used to do a thing when I was in Rhode Island, when it was off, like the big books are fall and spring.
Okay.
So the off books are summer, winter. Every Friday, starting at 4:20, we just did a thing called Stuff You Don't Hear on the Radio Anymore. And the only thing that had to be, the only way we could play it was if it had been played in the history of HJY. That's it. Our consultant hated the name, but the ratings, people would call and were just like, oh, I was listening to this song in high school or whatever. And every song has a memory to that person, whether it's folk, whether it's disco, whether it's country, it doesn't matter. Music is that one element that you're not going to get into a major argument like you will with politics and religion.
Unless you get into one of those Beatles, Rolling Stones arguments. I've seen those turn pretty ugly, but
they have. But I mean, I'll Abbey Road. So I mean,
man, I teed that one up for you.
I just, the argument or the discussion for that is the Rolling Stones never became the world's greatest rock and roll band until the Beatles broke up, and I'll leave it at that.
You heard it here,
I'm
folks.
with you.
He's throwing down the gauntlet.
No, I'm with you, John.
I will say that the debate of, I always say that Led Zeppelin is timeless. Every record is perfect. I don't care if you don't like Zeppelin, that's fine. But you can play Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin and put it up against Green Day. You can put it up against U2. You can't put I Want to Hold Your Hand up against Metallica.
Yep.
And that's, that's the way I think it is.
So,
if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you just for clarification, because I know it's more of a ratings thing, but when you were talking about the success that the stations are having right now, you said specifically even with women, and I'm again not calling you on it, but rather just inviting you to sort of talk through how the rating systems work and how that demographic is generally approached and or seen as a challenge or not.
Well, the scary thing is back in the day, you would fill out a diary. You would actually take a pen to paper or pencil and write what station you listen to for X amount of hours or whatever. Now they have a device called a people meter, which is like a beeper. So let's say, let's say, Jake, you're out with the wife and you're wearing a people meter and you go to the mall and you go into a store and they're playing a station that you normally wouldn't listen to. Well, guess what? That station gets credit for the ratings because you're listening to it. Technically, you're being exposed to it. That's how it works. And I have had friends' careers hang in the balance of someone, you can see the exact moment when someone goes away from the radio station with this device. So is it perfect for the advertisers and sales? Yes. But for the guys that are talking in between the commercials and the women that are talking in between the commercials, their lives hang in the balance. And I've seen friends lose jobs over that, which is not fair. You can see the exact moment when someone tunes out You could be in the middle of the best break you've ever had. And if that one person goes away, you're done.
Wow.
So this is like the Nielsen version of radio?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, I mean, people get paid for it. I mean, there have been stories of people putting the people meter on oscillating fans because it has to constantly be moving.
Mm-hmm.
They put them on their dogs. They put them on their cats. I mean, when I was reading the physical diaries, there was someone who said they listened to a radio station 27 hours a day. That got thrown out.
Was that Ringo by chance?
No,
I had a question. I feel like that's his kind of line.
No, I mean, but it is, when you look at the stations like ERS and UMB and GBH, those are all funded by the people. So it's a little different. They still get rated, but they're not selling or dealing with the ratings the way, a sports hub is.
Right.
I mean, I hate to make that correlation because it's not the same, but I'm sure Kiss 108 does big business in the morning with Maddie, but once he's gone, I don't know what the station does for the rest of the day.
Right.
It's interesting because I'll be honest, terrestrial radio, kind of like network TV. I am the oldest of the millennials. I haven't had cable TV in 15 years, and I've been, I swore off Spotify and all of those things for, a good 7 or 8 years when it started. But now that's how I get to things.
That's same here.
Yeah, because I'm not in a car most of the time. I'm not, I've got my phone, and that's what I do. So I'm particularly interested. It's interesting to hear. I'm actually considering how little people are driving. I'm interested to hear that terrestrial radio is seeing boosts.
They're doing it. It's doing. Yeah, they took a hit like March, April, but May, June, July, the numbers have been pretty good. When the rating system goes, it's 6+. So I don't know any children that are listening to the Sports Hub, maybe, but. It's 6+, and then you have men, you have women, you have adults. So there's all these different, so a rock station would be men 25-54 or adults 25-54. Those are the numbers,
So when you say even women are listening, it is purely a demographic observation.
It is, but when you're told consistently that like a rock station is for guys only, you're wrong.
Yeah.
You're wrong. You're out and out wrong. I mean, the numbers I saw for was it June? Yeah, just June. I mean, women, huge numbers for HJY in Providence, huge numbers. And I just was like, whoa, and then the second station was like, I think they were double digits. And I think the second station was like at a 9, which is still a pretty big number. But when you break it down, that means someone is listening to that. That woman is listening to the station from 9 a.m. to 5 or 7. I mean, that's, it's not an exact science.
Yeah.
But it brings in a question that we were looking at in all of this. One of the things that Ethan and I deal with is, as we said in the very beginning of the podcast, broadening the tent. Broadening and breaking down. Breaking down those barriers. You have people that are listening to a rock station, and look, it's a little bit different because your job when you're on a rock station is to play rock music.
Mm-hmm. But the way you have to do it is, my old partner had this great analogy. Dream On is always going to be Dream On, and Back in Black is always going to be Back in Black. Those are the two pieces of bread you use.
Sure.
What you say in between those songs is what makes the great sandwich. Plain and simple. So it comes down to the talent. And for someone to do a quick 5-second break, you just want to get in and out, but that's more of a pop station. Rock stations, you can get away with talking for a minute, which seems, like a long time, but in reality, it flies by like that. So yes.
Certainly does on a podcast.
No, on a podcast, hours on end. But it's one of those things where, you had to always, like when I was music director in Providence, I never dropped a song. I had it timed out perfectly that we could play 10 to 12 songs in an hour, and my partner and I could do our breaks, and we were still number one. We had it down to a science, but and every jock has it down to a science of what they're going to do and how they're going to prepare and what is going to happen. But overall, you have to make Freebird sound like it's the best thing ever, even though it's been played a gazillion times.
They've heard it.
And that was one of the things, like when I worked at UMB, coming from that world to this new world of Americana and folk, the community was way different. And I think they were all closer. There was no animosity, because sometimes rock bands don't get along with one another. And with the folk community, there was just a sense of love and respect, and everybody helped everybody out. And to meet someone like Laurie McKenna, who drove herself to the station and is as big and as talented as she is,
as many Grammys as she has.
Yeah, one of the nicest human beings in the world. And put her on the plane with of somebody else that I've met, and they could have been a total jerk. Same with meeting Tom Rush. Again, one of the nicest guys in the world. And I've met other, like the last time I saw Scott Weiland, and again, that was someone that I helped break out of New England, not personally, but the station played him, and we did a lot of stuff with STP.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, he's got his fedora on, he's got David Bowie mirrored glasses on, he's smoking a cigarette inside a building he's not supposed to be smoking in. He was rail thin. And the record guy, who I was good friends with, was like, Scott's in a mood, he'd love to see you, blah, 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 blah. I go back and I'm like, he talks me up, and I stuck my hand out and I'm like, good to see you again, Scott. And he just puffed his cigarette, blew it in my face and said, what's up? And that was the last time I saw him. And it's like, you have no right to have that attitude, And on the other end of the spectrum, I was never a Led Zeppelin fan growing up. I think it was when I started working at ZLX early on that I had to train myself to learn classic rock. I was into punk and Kiss and, a lot of the pop stuff.
Okay.
And I had the opportunity to meet Robert Plant twice. And I'll tell you right now, one of the nicest human beings on the planet. Wow. I love what he's done he knows he doesn't have to do Led Zeppelin. He has chosen where his voice is at right now. But if there's one guy that I would expect to be a dick and it was him, I would have said, okay, he's a rock god. No, he's not. He's one of the night again. He is someone that I would love to have a conversation with and just talk to for hours on end. Fabulous individual, nice, wonderful.
Love to hear that, because there's all that. There's plenty of disillusionment that can happen.
Well, and he's and he has seen it all. He's since he's done his solo career, he's been on label after label, and I have a promo sheet that was sent to me to promote a new single from an album he did a few years ago, a long time ago now. And I said, can you sign this for me? And he goes, well, what's this? And I go, it's a promo sheet that came with the single. The record label sent it to me. And he calls the band over. He goes, boys, come here. Because look, a record label is actually promoting us. Look at this. And he signed it and he goes, here, this will be worth something for you someday, mate. And that was it, And so, the disillusionment of someone like that who has seen it all,
right,
is, he has, again, he had every right to be an a-hole, and he wasn't.
It's when Jake and I started playing music together with Dan, the third original member of Pesky, we started having conversations, and I was sort of the one that was like, yeah, we're going to be a folk band. And I'll always remember both of them looking at me like, why? And I was like, because if we decided to do rock, we'd probably never leave Boston. Like we we don't have the time. We all have day jobs. Like we're not in that space. And B, all of the other people playing would probably hate us, and we probably wouldn't like them too much. Where if we become a folk band, those people that we're playing against or with, those are going to be the couches that we're crashing on when we are touring. And 15 years later, 14 years later, Jake and I know all of the couches from here to DC that are.
And those are just the therapists.
Yeah. Sometimes dual purpose. But you've got those friends that it's that mixed blessing of living the road life is you think, oh, this is great. I can go see my friend Dave Marsh from Miles to Dayton down in Long Island because we're playing Long Island next week. And, find out, oh, yeah, Dave, we're coming down. Oh, I'm going to be in Boston. It's like, there's that ships in the night scenario that happens with musicians. So
we once ran into Red Molly at a rest area. They gave us cookies.
Oh,
Yes.
Literally on the Pike, I was getting out of the car, and we had played a show where I had lost my contacts the night before, so I was essentially blind. And I got out of the car, and I just look up and I'm like, Lori? And in my head, I'm like, what are the chances? A, and B, this is a blonde blob. That's kind of all I got.
And you saw me walk across the parking lot and give someone a hug.
Yep.
And you were like, who is he hugging in the middle of a parking lot on the Mass Pike, for God's sake? And I walk over with Abby Gardner and Lori, and I think Carol Ann at the time. Thank you, Abby, for watching this evening.
Hi, Abby.
Abby Gardner from Red Molly, redmolly.com. Check them out. They are fantastic.
They were they did a show for us at UMB, and they were the first artist I saw that they said you can pay whatever you want for their CD. And I'm like, but don't you have people paying like $2? And I think it was Abby who said, on average, we're getting 20. And I think that's how much music means to the fans of these bands and the fans of these radio stations.
And they are, I think we met Abby of the Mollies. Abby was she was our friend before we really knew the Mollies all that well. Mm-hmm. She put out a record with Anthony DaCosta, and Anthony and Abby both introduced us to that entire pay what you want mentality. And for the most part, Jake and I have adopted that whole hog because we just find that there's so much that comes from that. Meaning even if you're only getting that $2, and our running joke was, if you got $15, awesome. If you get $10, great, that works too. $5, sure. If you got $1, keep it. Keep the $1 and take the record. You're going to need that $1 more than we do.
And I think we stole it. Credit where it's due. I think we stole that from Adam Ezra, as a matter of fact.
Wouldn't shock me. Wouldn't shock me. It sounds about right. But they introduced us to that mentality, and I think it's really just, frankly, it's just the right way to go nowadays because the goal is having people hear you.
Right.
And right now, the funny thing about an album, at least, this is my opinion. I should state right away, this is my opinion. An album is a business card for a musician. And if we don't look at it like that, that's kind of a bad choice on our part most of the time.
You're kind of right. I always felt, and only because of the generation I grew up in, I mean, I think a 45 is your business card. The album is the business. And, you're getting the introduction with, hey, this is what we sound like. If you like it, then you can go buy the album. And that's where we're at right now. I mean, you're seeing it's harder. I shouldn't say it. It's easier for a musician to be heard now, whether it's on a commercial or in a movie or anywhere, as opposed to being played on the radio, plain and simple.
Yeah. There is so, we were talking earlier about the ability for people to make records now where they couldn't before. And there have been so many wonderful sort of things that came from that. One of my favorite examples was, and this is old, this is like turn of the millennia old, David Gray, his White Ladder album. That was produced in his apartment in Scotland with an old drum machine. And that had like 3 number 1 hits on it.
Right.
And to go back to sort of the notion of what is a CD now, honestly, if you've got a fan base, if you can build up a fan base, they want to give you money. Mm-hmm. They like, that's their goal. And, we've joked about this before. Half the time people buy our record, they don't have a CD player.
Right.
They're doing it because that is the easiest way to support us.
Right.
And I think that's sort of one of the things that, we talk about Patreon and the different models that are coming out there for musicians. And I think that's really what it is basically saying, instead of buy this disposable piece of physical thing, because I know and you know that you're going to be listening to this on Spotify. You're not putting this in a machine. Instead, why don't you give me $5 a month? And every month you're going to get a couple of backstage videos of me, or this, that, the other thing. And I think all of these models are viable, but they all have very different realities to them.
Right.
Where do you see all of this going? I mean, we talked at the beginning about Tribal Mischief being where art meets audience, and radio was that medium for the longest time. How do you see bringing music to people and building community with it, both as we go and in the age of COVID and all of that?
Well, I mean, there's a certain generation that still buys CDs. Guilty. My son is 22 and he's getting into vinyl, but he's buying, the classic rock bands, from the Kinks to the Beatles to the Stones, Zeppelin, etc. But I think that's from my wife and myself influence on him. My daughter, thank you. My daughter, 0 CDs, 0 albums. Doesn't listen to Spotify. I know that she probably watches YouTube, maybe Spotify. The funny thing is, both my kids didn't like Pandora because they felt Pandora was playing the same songs over and over again. So they switched to Spotify, and that, I don't know if they're still listening to it. So where it's headed, I don't know, because right now everyone is just, I think it's more single based now. We've almost gone back to what it was in the 70s, where you're going to buy a single, then you'll get the album. No one has time to listen to a full album anymore because they just get it in snippets. It's the fact of, going back to when, everything became digital. You just hit a button, you get the song in 3 seconds. If you're making a mixtape back in the day, it would take you 2-3 hours to make a 90-minute tape. Now you could do it in no time. So it's when that happens, you're investing not just, your time, but you're investing the time of the other person you're going to give that tape to.
Right.
So now it's, where is that platform? And you're 100% right. It with this situation that we're in, there's either going to be a lot of great songs that are going to come out of this. It'll be like pirate times because it'll be drinking songs, but
yes,
it'll be that. It'll be maybe getting together community wise on a platform like this and playing. And, it's going to be difficult. But people are still getting music, however they get it, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's Spotify, whether it's through movies, whether it's through Apple Music, they're all there, but every single genre is different. It's like, do you see a metal band breaking out? It's like, I was talking to someone recently and it's like, you look back and it's like Five Finger Death Punch is the best rock band we have out there now. And I give credit to anybody. I can't play a musical instrument. I can't sing. So anyone that can do that, okay, you've already got it on me. But how far are you going to go in your career? Is there going to be another Metallica? Because technically they could be the last rock band. I mean, Foo Fighters, maybe, but when you look back, there's nothing out there. And I think that the singer-songwriter has always been strong, always been done right. And it's just reaching that proper audience. How you do that, it's beyond me, because that's all technical now. Do you drop do you drop an album on a platform like this, or do you do a show on Twitch and talk about the songs and make it like an unplugged or a songwriter session, whatever? There's got to be a way to make that happen. How, I don't know.
And it's interesting that you said that about the singles, sort of being the old model, because what we've been seeing for a few years, and I know we keep referring to our own guests here. I don't know if that's in bad taste, but Gangsta Grass, for example, they just dropped a video the other day, and it was, I think, their second or third track that they've dropped in advance of an album dropping. Mm-hmm. And there's still that sort of model of, we're going to give you a little taste. I think the difference now is the revenue stream. I'm not paying for that video the way I was paying for a single, back then. Radio was the introduction. We seem to have lost that next step of okay, well, I heard this on the radio, so I'm going to buy it so I can listen to it whenever I want, and then I'm going to buy the record.
See, that's what it's funny. I've always said that the people that got into radio when, you know, in the 70s and 80s, and when they became the bosses, they were looking forward to the 401k and the retirement aspect. And it was okay to play those 600 songs. And I hate keep saying 600 songs, but a lot of stations, that's what their playlist is. That's why people say, oh, you play the same songs over and over again. And I'm not breaking down that fourth wall. People know that, but it's the fact of I got into radio because I grew up listening to, I think, one of the best stations in the world, WBCN. And I never worked there, but I became friends with everybody that was there except for Parento. I mean, I knew him. I had seen him at parties and things, but everybody came to ZLX at one point, and he didn't. But talking to Carter Allen and talking to Ken Shelton and talking to Laquadera, every jock had to play a certain amount of songs, but then they could play whatever they wanted and had the freedom. So that's how I was able to get into Springsteen by Shelton. Mark was going to a lot of clubs, so you'd get a lot of like the not the dance stuff, but some of the hipper, more forward thinking bands. Carter was playing punk, Charles was playing songs that were just deep cuts from albums in the 60s and 70s. And I always said that the audience, it goes back to the audience is always smarter than what is perceived by the consultants and the people that run radio, because you could go 8 deep on a Grand Funk record and someone's going to know that song because when we were growing up, you listened to the record from beginning to end. You read the liner notes. You held it. If it was a double album, you rolled your joints in it. So they helped you in that regard. But it was the fact of every jock on BCN had that moment to make their kind of statement of, this is what I'm listening to and you're going to dig it. And that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, you have to be magical. I mean, the stuff I do for Westwood One, I'm playing, Katy Perry and Lady Gaga,
right?
And
I don't think anyone is just discovering Katy Perry or Lady Gaga. Right?
No, and
sorry, you're introducing me and Ethan because we're old, and
I'm older than both of you, so So I mean, I think that I always believe in musicians, put out whatever you can, constantly write. When I read all these biographies about all these artists, especially musicians like, Pete Townsend and Paul McCartney and Bob Dylan, always write. They're always getting ideas. And there's stuff that, that is kicked around for years that never got recorded. Everyone gave Van Halen crap when they did the David Lee Roth record. And those are all old songs, but the Stones have been doing it since, 1972.
Right.
I mean, so, it's still new to us. It might be old to them, but as long as it sounds good, that's fine. So how does a new artist do it? You just got to plug and have the patience and persistence to keep doing it. But now you're not having open mic nights. That's a problem.
Well, and we've actually seen a couple of those, like the Lizard Lounge open mic night. Occurring. There are still some of those smaller, and I'm not correcting you, but you're right. They're so much harder. And the question also becomes, where are the platforms? I mean, one of the fun things about Pandora, Ethan and I found some of our favorite musicians for a while because we listened to ourselves, maybe, on Pandora. But then we listened to the next artist and the next artist and the next artist.
Right.
And we heard all that, and that's what we've tried to do in a small way with things like the Lounge Stage, but I don't know what that path looks like. And I certainly don't know what it looks like now.
I think that Spotify has a big future. I mean, they've got tons of dough, and I've been looking at jobs there just to see if they could use a radio guy, because every job is either an engineer or a scientist, and it ain't rocket science. A hit is a hit is a hit. A good song is a good song, no matter what. Whoever wrote it. I mean, how many people have said, "Oh, I hate Bob Dylan"? Oh, you like Hendrix's "All Along the Watchtower"? Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's Bob Dylan. What? So I mean, and I'm constantly learning other songs. Mm-hmm. Like my friend who does the Beatles show on ZLX now played Little Richard and got crap for it, and I'm like, the Beatles opened for Little Richard. Paul McCartney does the ooze because of Little Richard. I've seen Little Richard, and he would tell you all that.
I remember seeing Dave Matthews Band at Gillette back in the day. And when I say back in the day, like this is probably 20 years ago. And the opening bands were The Roots and Carlos Santana. And
Wow.
Santana started the show, and the stadium was maybe 15 to 20% full. And then people came in, and by the time Dave Matthews is up there, the place is full.
Sure.
And I'm looking around and I'm going, Carlos, you've never heard of Carlos? You have no idea. No idea.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
to your point, John, I think that's that model. So we talked a little bit with Ellis Paul, who we had on about 3 or 4 weeks ago, about the fact that when you were getting your start in this scene, in the root scene, in the 70s and 80s sort of time frame, basically what you were looking to do was get out as much as possible and have some elder statesman of the community say, hey, you, come with me for 2 months.
yeah.
And
Right,
and pretty much all of the elder statesmen did that, partly out of altruism, but also because those elder statesmen often realized they were playing the same song for the 20th year in a row, and perhaps having the young, energetic kid in front of them would work out as well for them as it would vice versa. But, you talk to people like Ellis, to some degree, Vance Gilbert, Susan Warner, and that entire community, and they'll all tell you that, like, someone, not that they didn't achieve it on their own merits, they're all stupendous artists, but no one does anything on their own ever. And I still see within whatever this new version of the world is, there will still be that version of passing the torch that happens.
Sure. I mean, and it's with Vance. I mean, he opened for George Carlin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how different the world. That doesn't happen anymore. You'll have a comedian.
And Paul Reiser.
Yeah,
he's still opening for Paul Reiser.
Right. That's right.
And it was funny. The first time I interviewed Ellis, he had said that it was at UMB, and he had said that when he got to Boston, he learned classic rock by listening to late night radio, and it turned out it was when I was on ZLX. They wouldn't let me talk at the time, so I was just playing whatever I wanted. And I'm like, wow, Ellis Paul listened to me while I was playing what I wanted. But
awesome.
It's I always feel that diversity is king when it comes to music. I mean, Jimi Hendrix opened for the Monkees. Why? It makes sense now. But I mean, it's the fact of, I think they wanted him, but it's also the fact of, the original, when you look, it comes down to community. The original Hollywood Vampires was Keith Moon, John Lennon, Alice Cooper, Mickey Dolenz, and Harry Nilsson. Those are the original. That you want to talk about 5 completely different artists that would get snookered every night. And I mean, it turns out, I've interviewed Alice a few times, and he's like, Mickey Dolenz is one of his best friends, and they play golf all the time. Now, back in the day, they were just drinking, but you don't have that anymore. I mean, it's evident in the community here, in the folk community, but you don't see, Dave Grohl hanging out with, Dave Matthews. It just, it's just one of those things. But I just feel that every musician is passionate about what they're doing. Like, that's the one thing I like about Dave Grohl. He's passionate. And when he did the Sound City documentary, which is phenomenal, and I highly recommend it because it is the history of just great rock and roll from, Fleetwood Mac all the way to Nirvana. And he's jamming with Paul McCartney, and Dave goes, I wish it was this easy. And, Paul said, it always is. And that's the one thing, I've always gone back to the Beatles. And when I got to UMB, because of my Beatles history, they all, my boss at the time was like, don't talk about the Beatles. Well, it turns out that a lot of musicians would just bring them up. So it got me going. But I don't know how to play an instrument at all, but I've read enough. And the reason they were so good is because they were playing 8 to 12 hours a night in Hamburg. And it's important. And I've said this to every musician, from young, not to the older people, but to the young people that are starting out. Practice, practice, practice. Get out and play as much as you want, because the most important thing is your family loves you, and they will lie to you. They will tell you that you're great. You need someone
Tell
to
this
say,
to your mother.
yeah, and it's one of those, it's not me being an ass. It's just, if you want me to help you, I'll help you.
Right.
Because I'm not going to lie to you. And there was a band that I was very close to signing. They got screwed over, and the singer was fantastic. He said he had written 20 songs, and he wanted me to go to New York and go to see one of the record reps. And he goes, I'll give you one song. And I go, dude, I can't walk into the vice president of a record label and say, here's one song. I said, you're going to give me 10 and I'll pick 5. I said, they want the album done now. They don't want to do a goddamn thing. They want you to produce it. They want you to bring it into them. And you're probably going to have to sell 50,000 copies before they even sniff you.
And that's the people certainly in the rootsy-ish side of things that have really, really broken in the last 10 years, like the Mumford and Sons and those folks. They had hundreds of thousands of albums sold before they ever crossed the Atlantic.
Sure.
Like, I remember them playing to 4 people at TT the Bear.
Wow.
Like, well over 2 decades ago. And that was after the Giant album had been released. The Giant album had been a giant album in the UK for a half decade before they crossed.
And less than a year later, they played the House of Blues, sold out.
Yep.
They played to 100 people over in Central Square in Cambridge and Mass. And then,
I can't remember. I was talking to some agent sort of about particularly the model and what we learned from sort of the Mumford and Sons thing. And basically what he did is he's like, all right, so you think Lady Gaga, super mega star, you think Mumford and Sons, neat happening indie band. Here's the difference. When Mumford and Sons finally got signed, they owned their album outright, and they had enough success that they were able to negotiate a very high percentage when they got signed. Lady Gaga's record might have sold, 8 million copies in the first 2 months, but they spent well over $12 million promoting it before that.
Sure.
They spent, X many millions of dollars to make it. And she herself is certainly making money. Like none of these megastars are paupers by any stretch, but her percentage of the take home is infinitesimal by comparison.
Yeah, and I think she's a true talent, and her album Joanne was a great album that got ignored because it wasn't poppy enough. It was an album. It was a singer-songwriter album, and she wrote from the heart, and I enjoyed it. And I was like, this is just as good. Like, I'm not saying they would have played it on UMB, but it was there were some songs on it that you could have played. It's okay to break outside that box. And, when I got to UMB, it was a tough road to hoe because we wanted to get some new blood in there. We wanted to get some newer music. And Jay has done a fantastic job. And, Jay and I have known each other for years. We worked at ZLX together. So I was happy when he came in, and when I left, he basically replaced me, and he's done a fantastic job. But it was getting over that hurdle of, I would have to do music meetings and I would have to lie. Like I wouldn't tell the guys who it was, because if I said this is the new Greg Allman, it was produced by T-Bone Burnett, they're shut out. They're not listening. It was the same thing with Mellencamp. It was the same thing with a few other people. And you have to, what they taught me there was, it's not just about the melody, it's about the lyrics. And that's where I appreciated everything guys like you do, women like Red Molly, Natalia Zuckerman, all those people. And again, that community, it goes back to that no animosity, nothing but love. And that is key. You all support one another. Yeah. And the same thing said,
the people that step outside of that they don't continue because the community polices itself in some ways, and won't allow for it.
Right. Judging the Rock and Roll Rumble, I love being able to do that because I do get to see the up and comers and everything else. But that music scene is good, but they're losing clubs. You guys aren't. That's, I mean, a band that plays the Rock and Roll Rumble isn't playing Passim.
Yeah. And it's an interesting, Jake and I, in a normal year, my neighbor recently remarked that this is the first summer where he's seen me here any weekend, let alone every weekend.
Right.
Because in the summer, I'm at Clearwater, I'm at Philly, I'm at Falcon Ridge, I'm going to all of the festivals. I'm taking part in all of the events that happen in this environment. And, I've certainly had relationships with other artists where like we didn't necessarily get along. But I can't think of a single artist in our 15 years that I ever felt competitive with. It always felt like rising tide lifts all boats. Yep. And there were jerks, but there weren't jerks from the perspective of oh, I'm a jerk because unless I treat you poorly, then no one will notice me. Right. Like that, you don't get that. And I see it because I've played in other sort of mediums and in other places, and I've been in those spaces.
And that's part of the allure that I love about going to Toad, going to the Lizard Lounge, because I'm with adults. I'm not with the backward hat baseball crowd. And the fact that, you can go on a Wednesday night, catch Dennis Brennan, and Peter Wolf will be there. And I've known Peter for years on end. So, and everyone leaves him alone. I mean, everyone knows who he is, but they, they just let him be and he'll get up and perform and whatnot. But there's nobody, there's no fights. There's no one staring you down if you bump into them and spill your beer or whatever. And I kind of like that. But I mean, and I still miss going to mosh pits, but I'm bust a hip now.
And that community, everyone goes out and supports each other. And that's one of the reasons why we foster community, as broadly as we do, is we both believe in that sort of community where, you'll walk into one of these clubs in Boston and you don't realize that 8 or 10 other people there are musicians, and they played here last night or a week from now or, a month from now, and they're friends with this person and whatever. And everybody's there to just be a part of that community. There isn't a fourth wall. Passim is the same way. All of these, especially the folk and Americana, and I don't know the rock world as well as you do, so but there isn't a fourth wall. You come off stage and you're just in the crowd. And we see that, look, Falcon Ridge is our spiritual home as well. And Red Molly, for example, if Abby's still watching, one of the ways our band got found was Abby was roaming around the hillside at 2:00 in the morning, and she's a main stage artist. She'd been on the main stage earlier that night. And it's why we love these festivals and this community, is because there's no ego about it. Yeah, look, Abby knows how good she is. She knows how good we think she is because we told her.
Many times.
Anthony DaCosta, speaking of writing records and only releasing part of it, he would write 4 records a year and release 1. And I told him when he was 18, I wanted to cut off his head and steal his power because I was so jealous of it. But that it's what we want to be a part of, and it's what we want to bring people into. I'm sorry, I'll tell this real quick, but I played Cassandra House, friend of ours. She's played the lounge stage from Long Island, and I played her for this young guy who I know. He works for me, and I was like, "Would you listen to this?" He's like, "Absolutely." I was like, "Would you bring friends to come listen to this music?" He was like, "Absolutely." I was like, "So would you ever come to a folk festival?" Never, ever go to a folk festival.
But it's different now because the Newport Folk Festival jumped the shark many years ago. But it's still a good take. You are still going to see some good, like the Highway Women. My God,
yes.
What talent. Brandy Carla, I was at BOS the first time I met her. The record rep was an old friend of mine, brought her in. Sweet, demure, shy. I listened to the record and I was like,
and it comes across on stage.
Yeah.
It comes across on stage that she's genuinely honored to be on that stage with those other musicians. She has no ego about it.
And when she came back to do another interview, it was within the first year of the record, totally changed in regards to the fact of I saw her mature and get comfortable with crowds and do interviews. And it was great to see an artist like that evolve, yet still put out fantastic records. Like she is like, it's good to be on the ground floor of an artist like that.
Yeah. And I love that unquestionably she came from our world and moved on to bigger and better things as she deserves. But I also, even though my admiration for him holds a candle to Jake's, people like Jason Isbell, who frankly, they don't need to shout out folk music. He can just be like, I'm me, I'm doing what I'm doing. But he happily says, of course I'm a folk musician.
Proudly, yeah.
What do you think this is?
Right.
So like there is part of our community, and I'm not saying a lot of it, I'm not saying the majority of it, but there's part of our community that whenever a broken act does that, gets bent out of shape. And I really wish we'd stop it. Because I think being able to accept the people who appreciate, the not just the art form, but what the community is as a whole. I mean, anyone that does that should be met with open arms.
Yeah.
I've just read 3 biographies. I read Blondie's biography, Steve Gorman from the Black Crowes, and I'm now in the process of reading the Beastie Boys book, which is absolutely amazing. It's one of the best books I've ever read. Oh, wow. It's so well written. All 3 of them are brilliant. But the one common thread is the community. Blondie talking about Talking Heads and all those bands, the Ramones from the New York scene, and then being in London, and the Ramones are over there, and they're hanging out because they're friends, and they play. It's like that was the ground floor for those bands before they became huge. Same with the Black Crowes, the crowd they hung around with in Atlanta and touring with other bands, and Chris blossoming into this thing, where they got kicked off a tour because he got full of himself, and he made fun of a beer sponsor, and then later on, a beer sponsor came and said, we want to, and he was like, yeah. And the band was like, no, we got kicked off a tour for that. So, but it's in the same with the Beastie Boys in regards to the rap culture in New York. Like they're big fans. They were big fans of Run DMC, and they got to hang out with Run DMC. But the respect and the clubs and who played and what DJ did this. So it's the common thread with every musician, every genre. It's the same with jazz and same with blues.
I caught up to Adam Duritz from Counting Crows. Counting Crows is one of my favorite bands ever. I haven't spoken about it much on the podcast. Polarizing band, perhaps.
Hey, the guy dated 2/3 of Friends.
Yes,
the women. So he did all right.
But I think he's an unbelievable. To go back to your point about lyrics, I think he's an unbelievable songwriter. Yeah. And I saw them at a venue down in Connecticut where they had to walk through basically the public to get out of the arena that they played in. Okay. It was one of the casinos. And so I figured this out, and I was like, well, shoot, I have a couple of Pesky J. Nixon CDs in my pocket. I handed one to Charlie Gillingham, their keyboard and accordion player, who I idolize. Charlie, if you're watching. And
come do the podcast.
Yeah, come please. And I waited for Adam Duritz to come out. And he walks out, and he's got 3 or 4 people with him. And I kind of run and catch up. And I'm thinking, my first thought is, well, just stick the CD in his pocket. And then I went, no, it's stupid. Don't do that. But I sort of matched stride with him. And he looks over. And so now I'm in this group of people, but I'm walking right next to Adam. And I hold up the CD and I was like, Adam, I'm a musician. You're an absolute idol of mine. I love all of your records. I think you're an amazing songwriter. And it would mean the world to me if you would listen to this CD. And he went from, who the fuck is this guy, to as soon as I said that, his whole face changed, completely changed. And he looked at me, he went, absolutely, man, I will definitely listen to the record. Now, I don't know if he ever did. He probably threw it out. But it was that shift of, he wasn't talking to a fan. All of a sudden, I was another musician. Right. And that changed the conversation completely. And there was that little bit of community there all of a sudden.
One of the things I've learned is if you are a fan of a band or whatever, it's better to find out what they're listening to, or pick out a lyric that stuck with you that you could bring to them, what did you mean or whatever. And it's even the fact of, it's not me being a name dropper. It's the fact if I know that someone I know is good friends with the band, their demeanor changes, because now I know that it's like, okay, this guy, it's okay. We can, I'm not there as a fan. I'm there, and it's good to have that. And that's important because they're people,
Well, it's sort of discovering the subculture of sort of the musician side, that I didn't even realize it at the time, but in summer camp as a 12-year-old, I was introduced to Leonard Cohen, who just became the guy, still is the guy, and in my mind, no better songwriter, lyric writer in all time. And it wasn't really until my early 20s when I started as a musician realizing that like every songwriter that I adored, Cohen was their guy. Cohen was their favorite guy.
right.
And sort of discovering that kind of thing, it ended up being a really interesting. We lost Jake for a sec, but that's okay. Now I'll just get rid of the names. But yeah, it just became this really interesting sort of way of understanding people within your own culture, within your own community, and I know plenty of the stories are probably apocryphal, but like there's so many wonderful stories of mutual admiration societies, and the one that I know you'll be able to tell me is incorrect is Hendrix got a copy of Sgt. Pepper's before it was officially released.
No, he bought it the day it came out, and the
day
Beatles
it came out.
Yeah, and the Beatles they were in the room, and he played it that night. Well, Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah. But like stuff like that, I adore. I adore, the people that clearly just sort of love each other and love.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I had a friend of mine who was working in New York at K-Rock when Howard Stern was still there.
Yep.
And she had called me that day. I was doing the morning show on ZLX. And so she had called me and she said, I thought of you because she said, both your worlds kind of came together today. And so Paul McCartney was on with Howard, and following Paul was Ozzy. And she said that she saw Ozzy fall to his knees and weep like a teenage girl, because that's how big of a Beatles fan he is. And it's like the Prince of Darkness is a Beatles fan.
I believe it.
So I mean, it's that admiration. Like you wouldn't think, and it's the same thing. Like if you watch the Lemmy documentary, when he buys the Beatles mono box set at Amoeba in LA, it's like, it's in mono. It's the way it's supposed to be heard. And it's like, I'm like, Lemmy? So, I mean, it is that admiration when you do see, I went to Bonnaroo the year the Police played, and John Paul Jones did a jam session with Ben Harper and Questlove. And I was on the side of the stage, and at that time I was very friendly with Warren Haynes, and I had interviewed Tom Morello that day. So Warren and I are standing on the side of the stage, and I said, you going to hop up? And he goes, oh, hell no. And I go, why not? And he goes, John Paul Jones got here this afternoon. They practiced for 45 minutes. I don't know what the hell they're doing, but come see us tomorrow night because John Paul Jones is going to be playing with us. And I'm like, okay. He left. Tom Morello is standing beside me now. And I said, you going to hop up? And he goes, fuck no, man. No way. He said, I ain't touching that at all. I just can't. Like, you've got, two different styles of guitarists who had admiration for the guy that was in Led Zeppelin, and seeing this amazing jam session in a tent. That was like one of the highlights of that weekend, but the Police were the letdown.
Well, I mean, and that's the funny thing that I've found more and more, and I'm sure this is no great revelation for most people, but when I go to festivals and I'm really excited about like the big name is never what I walk away with, ever.
Right.
The classic example from our friends at Philadelphia Folk Festival on August 13th to 16th. Sorry, John. Last year, we were down there, and as headline acts, they had Paula Cole, and they had Jeff Daniels, the actor, who's also a great guitarist. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of sort of excited for those things. And they were great. They were fine. But Friday night at that festival, they ended the night with the Jazz Preservation Society Hall, or Jazz Preservation Hall, and Cha-Wa, which is one of the young up-and-coming sort of crazy jazz bands, and had those two bands play to close out the night. And I remember watching Cha-Wa, the younger band, playing and just being starstruck. And I was in the photographer's alley. I was taking photos, and I was running my camera back because they were basically grabbing my camera, handing me my other camera, and uploading them to the festival social media. And as I came running back, the Preservation Hall guys were behind the stage, just jamming out in the dark. No one could see it. No one would ever have known. But these were people that were just enraptured in the experience and loving what the other people were doing. And those are the magic moments. Those are in the highlights of my career as a musician. I think Jake would agree with me here. But like our favorite moments are the moments when other people jumped in with us and we were able to share that kind of thing.
Yeah, it just popped up on my Facebook memory. It was Paul McCartney played Fenway 5 years ago, and it's when Bob Weir came in and played with them. And one of my favorite Bob Weir stories is that he came in to HJY. He was playing the Strand down in Providence, and my partner is the same age as Bob, so they really hit it off. But we talked about everything, and I talked about how I love Bruce Hornsby, and I never got to see the Dead play with him, but I have some of the live shows, and I had interviewed Bruce Hornsby, and I had seen him solo, and I said, no offense, but you're a trained Berklee student and everything else, but I said, did the Dead change you? And he goes, yeah, they taught me to play looser. And he said they would get off the highway and I'd have to catch up to them. So when I interviewed Bob, I brought that up, and he said, that guy's an amazing musician. He said every single night we tried to go off the road, and he said eventually he would catch up to us. And we had played some Dead songs that never got played on the radio. We played some R. Crumb. And the guy that handles Bob, I always forget his name, but he's a Massachusetts guy. And I was emceeing the show that night. And when I got there, it's like, Bob, wants to see you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he said, no. He said, Bob had a great time with you guys today. He said, when we got in our car, he said, I was just on a Clear Channel radio station. We played R. Crumb and some Dead songs that have never been heard on the airwaves, probably. And he smiled, and I go, well, that's good. And he goes, no, Bob never smiles. So it's like, it is, once you tap into that, it's always like the one thing I was always taught when it came to interviews, don't talk about the records that are coming out. Talk about what's going on in their world. Get to know them. Don't be you can be the fanboy, but some of my favorite interviews have been the ones where I wasn't prepared. The very first artist I ever interviewed was Ginger Baker in a van down by the Charles River at the Esplanade. And
a little Chris Farley on us.
Yeah. And they had the van parked in front of the stack. So I'm doing the interview in the van, and I'm just reading my notes, and I, hand the microphone over to him, and all I heard was, what are you saying? And I look at him, and he's got his fingers in his ears, so he can't hear me asking the questions. So, and he was in town because he had polo ponies. But there was the first interview I did live on the air was with Ronnie James Dio, and this is pre-internet. I'm not a Dio fan. I'm not a Sabbath fan. So I look up in this book that we have, and I'm getting the information. It's like, Sabbath is English. Great. I got lots of questions. He comes in. I'm introduced to him, and he's like, how you doing? I'm Ronnie. He's got that New York accent. And I'm going, all my notes just went away. We ended up talking baseball and his time he grew up in New Hampshire. So, but those are the ones that I remember.
Jake and I have been having a lot of conversations because neither of us have a background in interviewing or in running a show like this. So we're trying to
don't tell the audience. They can't tell.
They know.
No, they have no idea.
So we've been just sort of trying to drink from the fire hose and figure out some stuff, and Jake is very, very meticulous, and he's good about getting notes, and he's good about sort of putting things together. I am a seat of my pants guy. It's just how I interact socially with the world. And I sent you a video on, I always forget his name, the Late Late Show, Craig
Ferguson.
Yeah. And one of the things that I always adored about Craig Ferguson is every major star that he had on had the list of agreed questions that you have to get. So it would have the cards, and in the beginning, he'd introduce the person. The person would walk out, and in front of the person, he would rip up the cards and throw them behind him every time. Oh, yeah. And it was always a joy to see the reaction of different stars, because some of them were like, "Oh, this is going to be fun." Others were like, "I got to get out of here."
Well, I just speaking of which, I had a conversation with a past guest earlier today where we agreed that in general, flying by the seat of our pants is fine. I had a question teed up for this particular guest that they were not prepared for. And the question was, I mean, it's easy. It was a softball. It was, as a black woman, how do you think the Constitution would be different if it was written by a woman? And I figured we were just lobbing that one in there, My daughter came up with that question, for the record. And so I spoke with Bethlehem earlier today, and I agreed that perhaps I should have prepped her a little bit with that question. My note-taking does not involve prepping guests. I'm not suggesting that Ethan, that I prep the guest and Ethan doesn't. I'm suggesting we don't.
Those are the best interviews, though, when you're not prepared. That's when you're going to have some of the best conversations, and that's throughout my career. It has always come down to that. You end up talking about something else. Like Steve Morse was nice enough to invite me when U2 played the Somerville Theater, and I ended up talking radio and records with Larry Mullen because it's his band and he's the business guy. And we talked about, when you're in New England, we're going to play more songs by U2 because of BCN, because of HJY, because of GIR and HEB up in New Hampshire. We're going to go deeper, but if you go to the Midwest, you're going to get the top U2 songs. All I Want is
Streets of No Name.
With or Without You, Desire, Mysterious Ways. Here you can get even better than The Real Thing or Who's Going to Ride Your Wild Horses and go deeper. But that is evident in every aspect of America. There's going to be certain pockets where an artist is going to be really, really popular, and you're going to go deep into that catalog. It doesn't happen very often anymore.
What do you think it is about Boston? Because we talked before the podcast about there seems to be this affinity for certain bands. You'd mentioned U2. I remember back in the late 90s, I think, going to see Bare Naked Ladies, and they had been lined up.
They broke out of here. They broke out of here as well.
Yeah, they had the free concert down at City Hall.
The free concert at City Hall Plaza. They were planning on like 500 people, and they got somewhere between 30 and 50,000 people, and they had no idea. They had a 20-minute set lined up.
They did a free show for
third row.
Really?
Third row.
Wow. They did a free show.
I was buried in Kraft macaroni and cheese.
I bet you were. But that is all the hard work of one of the record reps in town called his name's Andrew Gavazzos, and they love and respect him, and they broke out of here because of him. He broke out of New England, and I will say that the record reps in this part of the country work their asses off. Yeah, some of them are they all have to do their job, but they're passionate. They're just as passionate as musicians. And there are some bands that they have to push. Right. And there are other bands that they believe in that they want to get behind. Yeah. It's just the dynamic now is so different that do you need a major label? No. Right. The indies are where it's at. But there is something about Boston, U2 broke out of here. Meatloaf broke out of here. The Police broke out of here.
I've heard stories about the Police at the Rat in Kenmore Square in Boston.
Yeah. My friend opened for them. They were what the hell was the name of the band? I'm drawing a blank. Unnatural Acts, and they opened for them. And I got to meet Andy Summers, and I asked him, "Do you remember signing in the window in Strawberries?" Or there was a Strawberries in Kenmore Square right next to the Rat, and the Police did a signing there. And it was the day of one of their shows, and my friend was there, hanging out with them, and they shared the same dressing room, and the dressing room with the Rat is the size of was the size of a closet. So, there's something to be said. They always I brought a friend of mine from Hawaii. His girlfriend said, I'm going to take him to see U2 at the Staples Center in LA. And I'm like, you're coming to Boston in December. I said, take them to see U2. I said, you never know what's going to happen. It's always a great show.
Right.
Turns out it was when Steve Morse retired from the Globe.
Oh,
So
Jesus.
I had my friends, they were staying at my house. So I'm like, I got word that they were going to show up at JJ Foley's. So my friend got to meet and hang out with Bono and Paul McGuinness, their manager at the time, at a dive bar, if you will.
Right.
But there's something to be said. The important thing about Boston is they will do things. Bands will do things. And real quick, the night Ray Bork won the Stanley Cup, I had called Carter Allen because it was 3:00 in the morning and I was coming back from New Jersey from Game 6 for the Stanley Cup. And Game 7 was Saturday night. That was the night of the U2 show. Carter and Larry Moulter, who ran the Garden at one point and is an old friend of mine, walked up to Carter Friday night and said, hey, can we talk to the band about tomorrow night? And Carter said, the Stanley Cup Game 7? Yeah. And Larry said, Carter, I've known you for a long time. You're not a hockey fan. He goes, no, John Laurenti called me last night. So long story short, Bono, they had to explain what the Stanley Cup was, why it was important that a team in Colorado was you were rooting for. And Bono said to Carter, if it means that much to this city, we'll do it. And that speaks volumes, and it's the same with Aerosmith. It's the same with Peter Wolf. It's, realizing that Van Morrison lived in Cambridge when he made one of his greatest albums. Come on. There's something to be said. And it's because we're passionate about the bands. No, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's Pearl Jam, whether it's Tom Rush, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, Bob Dylan playing Club 47 back in the day.
Yep.
People, Joan Baez.
Yep.
The same thing. It goes all the way back to that. And we have a pride. We have a pride that we hold on to our own and we hold things that are special to us. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in New York and Chicago and Dallas and Austin, but there's just something about the Northeast. And I think it's because we are connected to Connecticut and New York. It's easy to get to. You can play a bunch of clubs. You can come up from New York and play Connecticut, Rhode Island, Boston, New Hampshire, and go all the way to Maine. And you're still going to,
There's really no other region in the country that has the proximity of as many different marketplaces as we do.
Yeah.
And New York could be argued to be more central, but when you look at what's starting to happen in the Portland, Maine area, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire is starting to have a burgeoning
great
scene.
restaurant scene up there.
Yeah. And one of the things that Jake and I have noted through our work with the Northeast Regional Folk Alliance is some of the best artists that we're seeing are coming down from the Maritimes.
Oh, really?
So they're punching down, driving down through Maine, hitting like Boston is their Shangri-La, and if they can make it work here, then they keep going. Yeah. But there's really I'm a Boston brat, pure and simple, always have been, always will be. There is a level of passion as a Red Sox fan. I'm sure anyone that shares that with me can understand what I mean when I say that. Same holds true really for all of our sports teams, but our musicians, we feel the same about our musicians.
And I think because we had such, I don't want to say, we had a down time in sports that you could still be passionate about the teams, but we weren't winning.
It's called my childhood, John. It was the entirety of my childhood.
At least I had the Celtics and the Bruins. It wasn't until later on, but I mean, it's the music thing as well. And I also think because of the college scene, I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of people now famous and, not famous that have gone to the clubs that we went to or bartended at those clubs while they were going to school here. It was like, talking to Tom Morello when he was an Audio Slave, I never realized he went to Harvard and he's a political science major. And I had a great conversation with him. And, I said, what'd you do today? And he said, I took Chris Cornell. He goes, I took Chris through Harvard Yard. He goes, he'd never been there. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And the funny thing was, after the show, I knew who Tom's Harvard friends were. I'll just leave it at that.
Well,
they were not bathed in leather. Let's put it that way.
surprised.
Ensconced, I should say. Do you guys have any questions? I mean, there was a lot of stuff we wanted to get to, and if there's something, just throw it out, and we'll do a quick session if you want.
I think we're getting close to getting ready to start wrapping, but I did, I'll be honest. So Jake and I, in trying to come up with what we want the show to be, the basis of it for me was conversation. Like, I didn't want to do interviews. I wanted to have conversations, and I think it's part of the reason why, as I saw him starting to take notes, I was like, I'm not going to do anything. But with all of the guests that we've had so far, for the most part, they were people that both of us had a relationship with. And when Jake initially suggested you, my first thought was,
F him.
No, not F him. Like, John, I remember you probably don't, but we were one of the last bands to play the WUMB festival, the Boston Folk Festival.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And I remember spending a good hour with you and Jay, just sort of talking through stuff. You were always super kind. It was more
Thank
of
you.
we had these conversations with people about building community and about the challenges of being a musician. And initially, to me, I didn't quite get the connection between radio and that, which is foolish, but it's just where my head was at. And what kind of made it click for me is, I think one of the things that people tend not to understand about the life of a musician is you are not only reinventing yourself all the time, but you are hustling to do anything.
Right.
Meaning you can play a great show, but now your job is getting 10 more.
Yeah.
And most of the folk DJs that we know in the scene, who are great, and we love them, and they're dear friends. Ron Olesko, who started Folk Music Notebook. Well, I won't go through the list, but what we sort of see in a lot of their sort of trajectories is staying with a particular station for a very, very long time.
Right.
And one of the things that sort of made you make a lot of sense to me was you've lived the life of a hustling musician in some ways. You have represented music in many, many different forms. You've represented your profession in many, many different forms. And just knowing you from our time together, that was the thing that flipped the switch in my head. And I'm like, you're right, John's an excellent choice. This will be a fun conversation.
Thank you for saying that. I just, like I said, my time at UMB was short, but I learned to appreciate the music. It was funny when I first got there. One of the first records I wanted to play was Raising Sand. It was the biggest album of Americana at that time since the Oh Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack. Mm-hmm. And I was like, we could go it was already been out for a year, I think, maybe even 2 at that point. And I said, why aren't we playing it? And the response was, well, he was in Led Zeppelin. Our audience doesn't like Led Zeppelin. And I'm like, it's one of the best albums I've heard in my life. It was so good. And so we started playing it. And the response was good. I wasn't saying, we weren't saying it was Robert Plant. But I will say one thing. My time at UMB, I learned a lot. Like, you had to do your homework. That was the key. And you just couldn't fly off the cuff and be funny and tell a dick joke. Or, I mean, I built my house on dick and fart jokes. But I couldn't do that at UMB. And, you know, I learned to appreciate, and again, meeting all these artists that I didn't, like, I knew the songs, but I didn't know the artist, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So, you know, to meet, who I'm drawing a blank, the guy that wrote Circle Game.
Terry Chapin.
Yeah. You know, I mean, but who had the big hit with it?
Well, Joni covered, a number of people covered it, but I know Joni covered it.
It's a male. It came out 1968, 69, his version of it. Anyway, I forget who he is, but I met him a bunch of times. One of the nicest guys, you know, and the conversations we had, like Ramblin' Jack Elliott telling me that he would drive up from New York and have Bob Dylan asleep in his back seat. Yeah. You know, I mean, those are the stories that I remember. And I forget who came in, but it was an artist he was an older guy. He was local, but when we were done, when we were off the air, one of the guys in the band said, man, I haven't had that much fun since I played with Jerry. And I'm going, Garcia? And it was two of the guys from New Riders of the Purple Sage in the band. And I'm like, if I had known that, but it was still a good interview, but it was the fact of going in that different dynamic, or hearing, an artist talk about playing Faneuil Hall, early on, or going through there, and, the Allman Brothers were in town and they got to hang out. And it's just one of those weird things. And again, I appreciated my time there. It taught me to learn and appreciate the music better than just saying this is. You have to tell the story of that. And it's up to the artist to make sure you have a compelling story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we appreciate certainly what you did for us. I
listened to every record that came across my desk, and it was a lot. But one of my program directors that was there stuck up for me and said that when we had our music meetings, he's like, John's one of the few music directors that listens to every single cut on the album, because I believe that everybody has at least one good song in them. Everybody, even if you're a non-musician. And to do what you guys do and do it on a regular basis. And, when you look at the guys like Pete Townsend and Ray Davies and Paul McCartney and John Lennon, those are my favorite songwriters. They're still doing it, and they did it constantly.
Yeah.
Constantly. And, Bob Dylan, I just picked up Bob Dylan's new record. It's good. Lyrically, he's done some pop culture stuff that I wasn't expecting from him. And, Charlie Sexton, who was an old friend of mine, I haven't talked to him in 1,000 years. He's the guitarist on the album. And I just really appreciated what he was doing. And, it still bums me out. The only time I saw Bob, he was playing with Paul Simon, and they were flipping, headlining.
Yeah.
The night he played Great Woods, or whatever it was, Bob Dylan opened for Paul Simon.
It'll always be Great Woods.
Exactly. And I'm going, Bob Dylan should open for nobody.
Agreed.
Plain and simple.
Agreed.
And, I caught 45 minutes of the show, but it was still fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, overall, I've said it before and I'll say it again. For any musicians that are watching, just practice, go out and play, have fun. When you can go out and play, if you can film yourself and you want to upload it to YouTube, do what you got to do. Use every platform possible. Radio is, I don't want to say it's secondary, but if you don't have major label backing, it's going to be tough to crack that nut.
Yeah. Well, John, honestly, it was such a pleasure having you here. I hope you'd be open to coming back and having more conversations.
Would love to, yeah.
I think sounds like our listeners here would appreciate that as well.
But it's this crazy little thing of trying to be a creative in the world today. It needs people that are passionate about it, but not trying to compete for it. And that was, in essence, sort of one of the things that changed Jake and my trajectory in the last 3 or 4 years, from being the people that were trying to be the people on stage at every opportunity, to be the kind of people that look at the people that are producing these wonderful pieces of art and just trying to get other people to notice it, because there's just seeing this community live on, I think, is at the base of it what we want to do, and live on in a more healthy, robust, and diverse way.
And I would love to be able to see or hear people. If you can reach out to people that in other parts of the country, like Austin, Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the hotbeds of music, and see how they're dealing with it. My nephew is the sound engineer for the Tennessee Center for the Arts. He is back to work, and they're very close to, I think, they do more Broadway shows, but they have had concerts there. And he said right now the shows, if they are up and running, they probably will stream them at some point. But for artists like Dolly Parton or Willie Nelson, you got to deal with so many layers of the onion with everything, like just with lawyers and the label and what's protected, what isn't, and it's going to be difficult, but I think that we'll come out of this hopefully stronger and better. I just want to see the community get back, and I miss, it's like Steve Morse is one of those guys that is, he still wants to go out and do things. And
I've seen Steve at 1 a.m. at Toad rocking out to my other band, Baker Thomas band, 1 o'clock in the morning. And look, Steve's 6'6", and so you can't miss him. And it's incredible to see folks like that, musicians and journalists as well.
But through him, I've been able to meet so many great people, whether they're teachers or just people that, live in Cambridge, Somerville area, or musicians, and that's one of, it's one of those things that, if you haven't done it, you don't know. And, I just miss going to a show and running into someone that might be in from out of town and just was out getting a drink or a bite to eat and heard the music and decided to discover it. Yeah. That's not going to happen for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's the aspect of seeing music.
Well, and that's why we have the follow button and the subscribe button and the share button on these things.
Wait, hold on. If we're going to do this, Jake,
do it.
Follow button.
There it is.
Now I'm going to have to do one for the subscribe button.
You're not, on the one hand, you're not bringing anybody else out to a show right now. You're not like, oh, I'm going to Toad, or I'm going to Passim, or I'm going to this, the Garden or whatever. Yeah. I'm not going to see this big show. Well, how much easier is it now to be like, hey, I mean, that's why I start watch parties on Facebook. That's why we post this on YouTube, so that, the message can be shared. Adam Ezra gets 500 to 600 viewers a night, but he gets 35 to 70,000 views per show that he does. And that's that right now. I think that's how the music continues and how we share it.
It's going to have to be, because you're not going to have a house party. I mean, you could, but it ain't going to happen for a while.
That doesn't end well.
No.
Nope.
But in any case, the moral of the Isoya story is simply that my father, stubborn man that he was, took something that made me incredibly uncomfortable and discovered something beautiful through that moment of discomfort. So, Isoya, in spite of it all, thank you for being here, John.
Isoya.
Thank you, guys. Ethan.
See you next time.
Yes, definitely. Cheers.
Thanks to all you guys listening.
Thanks so much. And that was John Laurenti. He is a force to be reckoned with. He's been part of the Boston music community for decades, and when he was music director at WUMB, really not just help break us in as much as folk bands get broken, but when we met him, knew our stuff, knew about us, was asking questions not from a list of, what are you working on, whatever, but like, wow, this seems to be going well for you guys. What was behind that song? What was, going into this? I've always appreciated it to this day. He was, has been some of the best conversations that we've ever had with someone in his line of work. So thank you, John, so much for joining us tonight. I think we can share that our guest for next week is Vance Gilbert.
Yes.
I'm super excited about that. He is unquestionably going to put us to shame, because he is far more entertaining a human being than either Jake or I could even pretend to be. But we're really looking forward to that. And I think we've now finalized it as far as our release schedule, meaning for anyone interested, the live show is always on Sundays on Twitch. The following Monday, the day after, the previous week's.
And for you listening, that's Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern on twitch.tv/Tribal Mischief.
Yes, what Jake said, what the audio podcast translator said. Our video from the previous week will go live on YouTube every Monday. Tuesday, we will put out the official word and announcement that will occasionally tell you guys here who the next week's going to be. And Thursdays, the audio podcast will go online. So John's version of this should be on your favorite audio podcast system, whether that be Spotify, Apple Music, Google, whatever it is. You can find it there on Thursday. We'll be announcing the lounge stage lineup this Wednesday.
Yes.
I feel like I'm probably forgetting something, but I can't remember.
No, we have a little catching up to do on the audio podcast side of things. Ethan has been carrying the lion's share of all of our media. For any of you who don't know, this is Jake, and Ethan does most of the heavy lifting on this podcast. I just sit here, I would say, and look pretty, but I'm doing a terrible job at that. But Ethan does most of the heavy lifting, and we're trying to sort of not diversify, but split out how things are done. And so we're still working on that schedule. We will try to catch up very shortly on the audio podcast. John's may not be this Thursday, but it'll be soon.
And we're certainly looking forward to that. We're looking forward to our friends over the Philadelphia Folk Festival and their festival that's coming up next month. We have tickets. You should get them too.
www.folkfest.org.
I am going to be spending that entire weekend basically taking notes on how they are virtualizing the musical experience. Yes. I'm super excited about it. We'll have thrown our whatever in the ring. What's it? Something in the ring? The cliche. Yeah, we'll be throwing our hat in the ring with the lounge stage 2 weeks prior. But we're really excited to see what they get going.
We've got a lot of great podcast guests coming up. Our season's going to run through about, we have, I think, 5 more episodes in this season. We'll do 12 episodes, and then we'll wrap up the season, take a few weeks off, and prep for season 2. If you have any thoughts on the podcast today, please send an email to, let's say, StreamYard@tribalmischief.com. That'll get to us. And let us know what you think.
Or even better, you can go to facebook.com/tribalmischief, and that is our community page where members of our community interact and can sort of share things. We monitor that very regularly. Always looking to hear what you guys have to say. Super jazzed that we had Abby Gardner from Red Molly watching tonight.
Don't go to facebook.com/tribalmischief. Go to facebook.com/tribalmischief productions. Not sure the name of the group, but Tribal Mischief doesn't get you there.
Oh, I thought I guess that I thought that was our community page. My bad.
We'll figure it out, but go to Tribal Mischief Productions right now.
Sounds good. Anyway, so thank you guys for being here. For Jake, clinically sexy Bush on accordion. Yeah, it's just, they reversed the camera on this system, so
the mirror is broken on the cameras.
It really messes with me every time I try pointing at things. Yeah. It's like getting in a flight simulator and forgetting the up down up thing. But for Jake, he's Jake Bush.
He's Ethan Baird.
I am Ethan Baird, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for coming.
Have a good week, everybody.